We go. Get on to music. Good night for the Benny Goodman. All right, welcome along, everybody. Here we go. Make myself a little larger here. Don't need you to squint. Yeah. Oh, look who's here. Surprise, it's Miles. Hey, Mona! Yep, here he is. Already. Hey, Dad.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the torrid clarinet and the even more torrid band who purveys assorted rhythms, all danceable, in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago.
Welcome along, everybody. Hey, Alexandra.
Blue Skies.
Give me one moment, Miles. I have got to finish making my drink. Hey, Georgia, Alexandra, Heather. Hey, Kathleen and Bridget. Hey, Mary Jo. There we go. Now it needs a little more smoke in here. Miles is fascinated by this, as he should be. Hey, Carolyn's mom over on Twitch. Hey, Kristen, Chuck, Heather, Marcia, hey, everybody. Everybody say hi to Statler and Waldorf over here. Now looking over my shoulder. Get this set up just about like that. Yeah. Hey, Martin. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, Heather. Hey, Chris. Hey, Gene over on Twitch. Hey, Gina. Well, Gina, feel better. Hey, Janice. Leah, it was a birthday present from my parents. I think I got my volume up a little too high. It's brick walling on me. There we go. Should be better. Evening, everybody. I got some news for you. For some reason, Cafe Press has changed the URL. It's now cafepress.com/shop/MysteriousChicago. But I'll show a better version in a bit. Miles, where are you heading? Miles has just trotted away. He'll be back. He's put in his contracted appearance anyway. Ian and Cindy in Detroit. Hey, Geraldine. We got good news. We're listening right now to Benny Goodman live at the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago at the Joseph Urban Room. And that's where Mystericon is going to be. We have got the Joseph Urban Room, or the room that was once the Joseph Urban Room. So how cool is that? Chicken noodle soup. Cool, I made chicken Vesuvio, which you down in Georgia may not know. That's a classic Chicago dish. Chicken with peas and potatoes in a white wine garlic sauce. Hey, Leah. Hey, Marita. Hey, Marie. So, yeah, we will be having Mystericon this year in the room where this music that you're hearing was being played. This is the Joseph Urban Room in the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. It's now just a conference room, but we got it. We will be in this room. Also, the room where Lionel Hampton joined the Benny Goodman Orchestra for the first major integrated jazz performance. Hey, Mom. Mysterious Chicago group chat blowing up. That's the room where it happened. Boat tour will be on Saturday. Tickets for that will be up probably tomorrow. Whiskey and a Cookie will be late tomorrow. We'll probably do it at 9 o'clock, but I'm intending to do it. It's been such a week. One of the most interesting and consequential weeks that I can remember. And one of the most energizing. Hey, Leah. Hey, Frank over on YouTube. I'm all right. So I got a library gig tomorrow, and I think Romeoville. Hey, Kelly. Hey, everybody. But yeah, the boat will be up in the morning. I would write a song. Boat will be on Saturday, so we're reconfiguring a little bit. We'll just inject some fresh vitality in there. It looks like the broadcast is working well today so far anyway, so that's nice. Hey, Joyce. Heather, yeah, Friday just might be a mix and mingle kind of night, but I might also get a bus tour going too. I will do as much as I can on Friday. Oh, hey, Chuck, that's awesome. I'll see you tomorrow night then. Hey, Eleanor. Hey, Grandma Belle. We're working all of this out now. Everything's set. They'll have a link up for the rooms tomorrow. I should be able to get the boat tour stuff up tomorrow. Maybe right after Find a Grave Friday, or hopefully, well, really right before is probably better. But then it gets buried by Find a Grave Friday sometimes. So,
Jenny Walk, Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
I'm gonna go tour or something. I'll see what I can get bus-wise. I don't remember what I paid for that bus last time. I only remember that it was at the last second I remembered I could write that off on the old taxes. That's a business expense, though I do enjoy the smell. Hey, Lisa. Yeah. Water bottle filled, knitting retrieved. That sounds like a good night. Over on my threads in Twitter, I just posted a clip where I interviewed Pete Seeger about the night Dylan went electric when he allegedly threatened to cut the cable with an axe. I interviewed him on the radio about 25 years ago. Couldn't resist asking him about that. All the Mystericon links should be up shortly, but here, you know what? We still got another Benny song to go. So I'm going to post the link now. We're going to post this repeatedly, I think. Hey, Ed and Warren. That is the link to the shop. You can see the new artwork there. There's two versions. There is both the Mystericon one and the Mysterious Chicago one that is only on Drinkware so far.
And they all loved it. They all loved those bastards when they played by Benny Goodman. And now another one just in the same vein, Rosetta.
All right, Rosetta. We're going to let Benny Goodman do one more tune, and then we'll get started properly. Evening, Uncle Lair. Your Uncle Shep. Hey, Jim. Friday, that's the plan. We'll just meet in the lobby, meet in the bar area. Joanne, we hate to miss you. But that sounds like a good fest, too. Hey, Rachel in New Hampshire. Hey, Betsy. You're not late yet. We're still listening to the Benny, and I'm still just, like, fidgeting. Kristen, I thought you would like it. The Al New Mystericon. Something about the old speakeasies that still exist in Chicago. The trouble is, it's hard to know which ones are for real. Every other place is said to have been a speakeasy. But the thing about these illegal speakeasies is they weren't known for keeping great paperwork back in the day. Why, Jill Mystericon is September 27th through 29th. In the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago, where this guy's about to tell us Benny Goodman is playing right now. Hey, Rob. And yes, cafepress.com/shop/MysteriousChicago. Annoying they've added that /shop in there. I was like, get another URL going or something.
Music by Benny Goodman is being presented from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. And now, Benny Goodman's arrangement of
Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. Well, that's the point where we usually let Benny hang it up for a minute there, hang up the old clarinet, which means it is time that we got started. Check out this cool new intro with a new instrumental piece that I call Dead People. It's a living. Welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. That's some new music that I'm working on for the upcoming podcast. There's a verse right after that. Dead people, it's a living. And that's what we're talking about tonight. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours, author of such books as Mysterious Chicago, the book, Murder Maps USA, new from Thames and Hudson, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, and Graceland Cemetery, Chicago Stories, Symbols, and Secrets, not to mention a whole book on H.H. Holmes. I don't know why. Do I have that in here? Yeah, of course I do. H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil. We tend to advertise H.H. Holmes as America's first serial killer, but as you know, if you're a longtime watcher around here, he wasn't even the first in Chicago. But before we really get started today talking about our antique serial killers, quick plug. I'm going to post this link one more time over in the chat. We have now got Mystericon 24 artwork is now available on various t-shirts, bags, etc. This is a very cool Roaring Twenties style design where the couple kind of blends in with the skyline. I went nuts figuring out which buildings to put in there and trying to add them. They're not perfectly to scale. We got the Sears Tower, the Hancock Building, the St. Regis Crane Communications, and the Wrigley Building. And then there's also this version, which appears on Drinkware exclusively so far. The big piece of merch that I really wanted to do is like plastic stadium cups with a whole wraparound artwork. And that turned out not to be entirely feasible, but you can get this on nearly wraparound design on mugs, tumblers, etc. Jordana, glad to have you back. So yeah, I hope, Jordana, that you were looking at this. We have got Mystericon coming up. This is the new design for Mysterious Chicago's Drinkware. But this is our look for this year. Mystericon is going to be in the Joseph Urban Room in the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. Home of Benny Goodman's broadcast of 1936, and where a couple of months later he brought out Lionel Hampton for the first integrated jazz performance by a major group. All kinds of stuff. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about antique serial killers. You know, dead guys. The kind with hats and mustaches, only they were not all even guys. Now, we tend to advertise H.H. Holmes as America's first serial killer. Of course, as you know, if you're around here, he was not even the first in Chicago, as we've covered. We don't really know who the first one was. And also, of course, we have to get into the notion of what counts as a serial killer. Usually we mean like a person who murders multiple people over an extended period of time. However, there are those who say it has to fit a very specific psychological profile of people who are just driven to kill, who just get some kind of sexual pleasure out of it, who can't really help themselves. By that definition, Holmes doesn't necessarily count. He doesn't seem to have enjoyed this much. It was a chore to him. And the people that he killed were generally people who knew too much, people who he thought he could make some money off of. Things like that. It wasn't just to satisfy a psychological need to kill. But more common, we would just consider people who kill more than once, serially, as it were, to fit the model. Now, we don't really know who the first in Chicago might have been, but there are these articles from 1840 about a murder that took place around that year from a guy who sure sounds like a serial killer to me. It was a guy by the name of John Stone. No drawing of John Stone survives, as far as I know. But this is a little section of Jefferson Park. It was approximately here in 1840 that the body of Lucretia Thompson was found. People had heard her screaming and thought she was just screaming for her cows. She'd asked people if they had seen her cows lately. Apparently her cows had wandered off, as they tended to do. But instead they found her dead, brutally murdered. Nearby, they found a guy by the name of John Stone setting fire to his pants. This is approximately, I couldn't tell you at all anymore. The place has all been redeveloped. But this little parkland over off of Devon Avenue is approximately in the region where they would have been. But John Stone, there's not really a picture of John Stone. Newspapers in 1840 published generally very little local news. Like, this was the Chicago Daily American at the time. All they talked about was William Henry Harrison in 1840. They had an election coming up. They mostly talked about how much they hated Martin Van Buren, how much they liked William Henry Harrison, and there might be a paragraph or two of local news in there. The newspapers that were published tended to focus more on bigger national issues that people wouldn't have heard about just walking down the street. Like, the local news is, there's 50 of us here and we all have cholera. Everybody already knew that. But in any case, this one certainly made the news, though not so much that they would illustrate it. John Stone was arrested by one of our police officers, one of the first police officers in town, a guy by the name of Henry Rhines. One of the few times he actually did his job as a police officer, instead of just using his position as a cop to arrest people he thought might be fugitive slaves. Here's me dancing on his grave. I was out of dance moves by the time I got to this guy, but I can do the hand jive. Even then, he was known as a drunken, degraded wretch. But he did arrest John Stone. So, I'm going to try to cover, that's a whole other one. We'll get to that in a second. So John Stone was put on trial in Chicago. In the trial, they asked him, all right, John, how come you killed so many people? And, well, they asked him how come he killed Lucretia Thompson. And he said, well, I couldn't kill Mrs. Thompson. And they said, okay, so how come you were setting fire to your pants? And he said, because they were lousy. They were covered in lice. And they said, all right, how come you didn't burn your shirt, too? And he slipped and said, there was no blood on that. Oops. So he was put in prison to await execution, but while he was in jail, some people came to interview him to find out what his religious affiliation was, and he said again that he did not kill Mrs. Thompson. But he did say he had killed other people before, so it was all probably a wash. Now that sounds to me like a serial killer. It's one of those things we'll never really know for sure. We just don't know enough about the guy, but he sure seems to fit the model to me. And there we can move on a little bit. We'll jump ahead about 40 years. There were probably some others in between this, but here we are on Madison Street in the West Loop. We'll just move on up. So right here where the children's haircut place is now. Or was last time I filmed this. Haven't been over there in a minute. But this was once a drugstore operated by a guy by the name of Thomas Neal Cream, who looks exactly like you would expect an early 1880s serial killer to look. Look at that. He's got the top hat. He's got the mustache. What a cravat, too. So Dr. Thomas Neal Cream came from Scotland and came through Canada, started working here in Chicago in the West Loop. But soon after he was operating here on Madison Street, he was arrested after a patient died on the table while undergoing an abortion. Very dangerous operation at the time. And he was brought to trial, and the Chicago Times just couldn't resist a pun on his name. Cream a Tartar. All right, he's acquitted of that one, but still kind of a pariah around the area, but still operating in any case. There was another person right at the same time. There was another woman who died in a nearby boarding house of laced painkillers after undergoing an abortion. Somehow they never connected it to Thomas Neal Cream at the time. Alice Montgomery was her name. There's a book about him recently that actually mentioned me for having connected her to that. But eventually he took up with a woman who lived way out west in Garden Prairie, long enough away that it was a long-distance relationship. But he decided the only way we can be together is to kill your husband. So Daniel Stott, her husband, was poisoned out in Garden Prairie. He was very soon taken in cramps, and before any of the neighbors could arrive, he was a corpse, as it says in the paper. Which also leads to one of the greatest gravestones in town. It's out in Garden Prairie. You have to really know this one's there. We'll move over. It's one of my favorites. I remember reading about this years before I came to see it. Daniel Stott. Says, down at the bottom it says, poisoned by his wife and Dr. Cream. Very rarely do you see a murder accusation carved into a gravestone like that. It's very old and worn now. There used to be a Freemason insignia up on the top of it. But here he is a little bit later. He was arrested for this one, but it was right around the time that James Garfield was shot when he was first arrested. Then convicted right around the time James Garfield died a few months later. So these crimes, they made the news, but they got buried under much bigger news. Now, at the time, in those days when a president was shot, the doctors told everything. I was just going through it today. The doctors talked about exactly what they were putting in the enemas that they were giving to President Garfield. They talked about the possibility that he might poop the bullet out. They talked about going up his butt trying to find the bullet. Every tiny bit of detail. But here, he was put in jail, did some time in Joliet, then eventually got let out of jail on his brother's recommendation and sent over to England, where he got back to work poisoning girls who came to him for abortions. He did this several times. Now, he entered the history books mainly when they hanged him in London. Allegedly, his last words were, "I was Jack the." And then the rope dropped. But this story came mainly from Mr. Billington, who was the hangman. It was one of the stories he liked to tell around the bar. There's very little evidence that it actually happened. It wasn't reported at the time. And, of course, Thomas Neal Cream was in jail in Joliet at the time anyway. He was the subject. There have been a couple of books about him. This one is written as a novel by A.J. Griffiths Jones. It is called Prisoner 4374. He was the first person to actually look up his prison records, which, of course, establishes that, yes, he was in jail in October of 1888 and could not have been Jack the Ripper, even if he really did say it. There's another more recent one by Dean Jobb, The Case of the Murderous Dr. Cream, The Hunt for a Victorian-Era Serial Killer. And he actually mentioned me in his footnotes. I was as the one who figured out that he was the one who killed Alice Montgomery. Pretty proud of that one. It's nice when I actually get to solve a mystery after all this time. But alright, so yes, he could have been the werewolf. I mean, just look. His hair was perfect. But at the time, this was a good 10 years before H.H. Holmes killed anybody in Chicago, and at the same time there was another guy operating over in the neighborhood that we now call Old Town. Now, when I filmed this, I hadn't quite figured out exactly where his doctor's office was. And I still like the video so much that we're just keeping it on this. It would have been right about where this convenience store is here, on the corner. But I really wanted it to be right where the European Wax Center is now. But you can't have everything. It was not actually where the European Wax Center was. It would have been across the street. But Dr. Henry Meyer, as he appeared at the time with a walrus mustache to end all walrus mustaches. He was born in Hamburg back in the 1850s. Very difficult to research because he wasn't even the only Henry C. Meyer in Chicago who was born in Hamburg in that particular year. But while he was living here, here's an actual photograph of the man. While he was operating on this corner in what is now Old Town, he was married and had a couple of kids, but fell in love with another woman. He was married to a woman named Ida, fell in love with a different Ida, who was married to a different Henry, which gets this stuff a little bit confused every now and then. So he decided the best thing to do was to murder his wife and to murder her husband. So he murdered Ida too, and he murdered Henry too. He was pretty quickly held for this, and Ida too, his wife, was disinterred to be tested, and he told everybody, well, sure, of course there's strychnine in the body. I'm a doctor. I give everybody little doses of strychnine when they're sick. It's not the weirdest thing I've heard of medicine back then. And Henry, we actually located his grave. It's not marked. It's very rare to find marked graves from this sort of story. But we've been right about there at St. Boniface Cemetery, where we were just the other day for the morning mini tour. But Ida, Henry's first wife, the one who died, is over here at Graceland Cemetery in a little family plot. Glad to have you, Gary. Later not. But this little spot, this unmarked space right here, is the Henry Meyer family plot. And you can see who's buried here. We've got Ida Meyer. We've got a 2-year-old named Edwin, a 2-year-old named Alma, a 3-month-old named Elsa, a 7-month-old named Victoria, and a 3-year-old named Blondine. Now, the most interesting thing about this, most of these he was acquitted of. There were a couple that they suspected he might have killed. Who this John guy is at the bottom, I really have no idea what the connection is there. But there is one of them. Which one was it? Is it the last one? There was one of them who was buried like the same day that they died, according to the records here. Yeah, Victoria. Victoria M. Meyer died 7/23 at the age of 7 months in 1888. Also buried at the same time. She would have been much older by this time, really. So Ida died way back in 1878, which would make this guy the first person we can really say is a serial killer operating in Chicago. But he then got bored with that Ida and divorced her. There was a point where it looked like she was going to die, and she might have been poisoned as well. She wasn't sure if Henry had poisoned her or not. I'm trying to get the divorce records. They haven't come in yet. It takes a while on these things. But he then went off and married a woman named Mary Dresser, and with her started a whole plan where she would marry rich guys for the insurance who had good insurance money, and then Henry would kill them. How many times they might have done this, we don't really know, but it seems to have been over and over, until finally they were caught, and he was put on trial in New York. Middle of the trial, one of the jurors went insane. This is a very bizarre aspect of the story, but one of the jurors just stood up and started having fits, and thereafter thought that he was Napoleon. Which almost seems like you went to the store to find ideas for how to pretend you were insane. So, He was put on trial at the time. He looked much older than the previous photograph. He'd moved on from just having the mustache and gone to the whole chin piece. So he was put in jail. He was eventually convicted after the retrial and sent to life in Sing Sing. Shortly after he got to Sing Sing, they caught him writing letters trying to plot to kill again. So for a while, they put him into a hospital for the criminally insane. Now, there are a couple of things from about 1912 saying he was petitioning for a pardon. And then, in 1919, a story went around that there was a guy on trial in Chicago who was operating right near Meyer's old neighborhood, a guy named Henry C. Meyer, who was trying to convince young women to marry old guys that he could then kill for the insurance money. He even wrote a letter to them saying, "We evildoers love night and hate daylight." Very weird case. And there was one article that says that this is the same Henry Meyer from back then. However, I'm not totally convinced that it is. This guy was sentenced to jail in Illinois. Now, that Henry Meyer, tomorrow on the Patreon, on the serial killer tier of the Patreon, we will be posting his prison records, which mention all of his various transfers, but don't mention him leaving, or him dying in jail, or anything like that. So he is really kind of a mystery. I'm still trying to find out a little bit more about Henry Meyer. We're working on this one. There's a lot left to find out about this guy. But one other who was operating in Chicago, or started her career at least, before H.H. Holmes. Let's move around down here to about the side of the Grand Pacific Hotel. This is also where General Garfield was staying, then Congressman Garfield, or Senator-elect Garfield, during the 1880 convention, when he was nominated for president after 39 ballots, or something, like 35, 36, 30-something ballots. But the Grand Pacific Hotel, which occupied part of this space, was also the home in the 1890s of Minnie Wallace, by then officially known as Minnie Walkup. Now, she was born in New Orleans. There was a judge there who was ready to marry her when she was like 12. So, partly to get away from him and partly for the money, she ended up accepting the proposal of Mayor Walkup of Emporia, Kansas. She was about 15 at the time. He was 48. But he took her from New Orleans to Emporia to be married, and about a month later died of arsenic poisoning. Now, Minnie had been to the store to buy arsenic. You had to fill out a little book saying why you were buying it, and she just left it blank, like she hadn't thought up a good enough lie. But thereafter, her husband died. She got all his money, but she was promptly put under suspicion and put on trial for his murder. But during the trial, they got a guy to show up and say, "Oh yeah, me and Mr. Walkup, we used to go eat arsenic together all the time. He thought it protected him from sexual infections at the brothels we went to. And we went to a lot of brothels, and he thought it gave him sexual powers, eating arsenic. So this is probably just he ate too much one day, trying to keep up with his, teenage bride." So this was the newspaper article about it in the Emporia newspaper. One of them, they had a lot of papers in that place. "Smut! Give me smut and nothing but. Dirty linen I can't shut, giving away one's own character to smirch the deal. Fearful revelations, the ghost of the dead man on the rack, attempt to make his memory more odorous than his viscera." They could sure write a headline in those days. But eventually Minnie was acquitted. She got all of his money, and as I always say, it's not like I am advocating murder, but when you're 48 and you talk a 15-year-old girl into marrying you, then she kills you and takes all your money, that's on you, bro. So Minnie, after spending most of his money, moved up to Chicago along with several of her friends. This is a portrait of her that was hanging in her house down on 31st Street, down in what is now Bronzeville. This portrait itself does not seem to survive. There's just this one piece of it in the Chicago Chronicle. But in 1897, she married a much older man here in Chicago named John B. Ketchum, who, strangely enough, died weeks later. And once again, it was thought to have been a murder, but this one never got as far as a trial. Throughout the inquest, despite having a really incompetent lawyer, she managed to establish that this guy had died of alcohol poisoning. She got a doctor to sign off on that. I've been through the probate file. I know exactly how much she paid that doctor, and it was a lot. I believe through incompetent maneuvering, all she got was the $70,000 in insurance money, not the whole rest of his estate. But that was nothing to shake a stick at. A couple of years later, her lawyer tried to sue her, and things just got messier and messier. That's all been covered just lately down on the Patreon. You can see the link down over there. Of course, part of the reason we do these things, I hate throwing in plugs like this, but part of the reason I still do tours every week is, promoting all the other stuff. Ketchum, you might remember, we went and found this guy. His grave is in Toledo. Minnie intended to have him buried in a plot that she had purchased in Forest Home. Her mother and sister are interred there. She herself is in California. Smoked peanut butter old-fashioned, delicious. But this is Mr. Ketchum, whose autopsy was awfully rushed. Dun, 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 dun. But that was 1897 that he died. There was another person, Mr. D.H. Louderbeck, who was the guy who named the Loop. He was a railroad tycoon and also at least a very good friend of Minnie. Never married her, but after his death by what may have been an accidental poisoning, it was found that he had left about a third of his estate to his friend, Minnie Wallace. Minnie then kind of drifts off of the record. She lived under a couple of different names. There's a picture of what might be her at the tuberculosis asylum while watching a Charlie Chaplin movie with a bunch of little kids. But we know when she died. We don't really know what her adventures were after that, though. Didn't really make much news. Kind of aged out of the profession, I suppose. But of course, we would be remiss if we did not cover the most famous of the antique serial killers in Chicago, who operated down here at 63rd and Wallace, right next to where the Englewood post office is now. H.H. Holmes, the White City Devil. So this is 63rd and Wallace, the little space next to the Englewood post office today. Would have been the place where he had a building full of secret rooms that we now know as the Murder Castle. At the time, Holmes in his time really just called it the Wallace Street property or the Englewood Flats. But after it was discovered by the press, after it was found out that this guy was a murderer, they started calling it the Holmes Castle. And then eventually the Murder Castle, after his death. See, Holmes was involved in all kinds of swindles and schemes, and after a couple of his girlfriends and one of their daughters had disappeared out of this place, he went to his friend Benjamin Pitezel, said, "Ben, here's what we're going to do. We are going to fake your death. We'll go to Philadelphia, get a dead body that looks like you, then we'll say that it was you, take that insurance payout, and live like kings, I tell you, damn hell-ass kings." So Pitezel went along with it. He kind of owed Holmes a favor at that point, and at some point Holmes decided not to fake Ben's death, but merely to kill him. Then traveled around with his daughters, Alice and Nellie, and one of his sons, Howard, until all three of the kids had disappeared at the time that Holmes was arrested just for faking his friend's death. But the story got stranger and stranger. He was a wonder in the press just as a swindler. And people started talking about Minnie Williams, a girlfriend of his who had disappeared in 1893 along with her sister. Then, the bodies of two of the children were found. And people realized, okay, this guy had a building that, you saw this whole newspaper article. Hidden secret rooms. There's stuff going on in this place. We should investigate. And initially they just kind of brushed it off, but once they started finding the dead bodies, they realized there was more to this. Trouble is, Chicago had a new chief of police, John J. Badenoch. He was a flour and feed dealer. His appointment was entirely political. He had no idea what he was doing. But when they started investigating this place, he thought he had solved every murder of the last 10 years. So, for a few weeks, all you saw in the press was they found a murder weapon. They found another murder weapon. Then the next day, there'd often be a small thing saying, oh yeah, that wasn't a murder weapon. You don't have to worry about that. And, of course, we cover this in much greater detail, but the stories eventually came around. This was a diagram in the New York World, which conflates the second and third floor and adds a lot of stuff from their own imagination, showing the dark room, the 5-door room, the mysterious closed room, the hanging secret chamber, the asphyxiation chamber, the death shaft, the maze. By the time they published this in August of 1895, the story had already really fallen apart. Early August, newspapers were publishing articles with stories like "Laughing at the Police." So right in the midst of that, the police showed up with a guy named M.G. Chappell. Newspapers always remember. He entered the Holmes legend under the name Charles Chappell, which is a mistake. And he told everybody, oh, I know what happened to the bodies. I used to buy the bodies from this guy and turn them into skeletons that we would sell to medical colleges. This has become a major part of the H.H. Holmes legend today. However, the story only lasted about 24 hours. Mr. Chappell did used to be a skeleton articulator, but not since well before Holmes even came to town. At this point, the police were just kind of out on a limb, found this guy who would tell them whatever they wanted if they poured enough whiskey down his throat. But Holmes did, in fact, can be contributed to about 9 or 10 murders, including Pearl Connor, Julia Connor, Emmeline Sagrand, another girlfriend, Nanny Williams and her sister Minnie Williams, and of course 4 of the Peitzel family. So he was eventually put on trial. What article was that one? This is a long article that he wrote explaining, oh, well, it wasn't me, it was some other guy. I mean, would a really good arch criminal like I'm supposed to be have done such a bad job of getting rid of the bodies? It's a fair point. He was hanged in Philadelphia in 1895 and buried chock full of cement. This is how he looked when they dug him up just a few years ago. Whole reason I did that History Channel show was I knew they were going to do this, and I really wanted to be there when it happened. But then they called me, oh yeah, we've been here for 3 days. Still a little bit bitter about that one. But let's move on just a little bit. As many of you know, I just recently turned in a book about another of our antique serial killers who operated in Chicago starting in 1895. He would have come to town just when the Holmes murder castle investigation was front page news every day. And a couple of months later, before Holmes had gone on trial, but after he had been captured, he married a woman who lived right up over here on Belmont, a woman by the name of Julia Steinbrecher. Now, he had just come from Wheeling, West Virginia, where his wife had died very soon after the wedding under mysterious circumstances. And then they noticed that Mr., as he called himself at the time, Mr. Huff spent like a sailor. But this was our guy, Johann Hock. Real name, John Jacob Schmidt, only lacking a Jingleheimer. Came from Germany in 1895, killed a wife in West Virginia, moved to Chicago, married Julia, and then she promptly died just a couple of months later. You might remember we found her grave at Graceland Cemetery, one of the very first Find a Grave Fridays. This was just the start of his career. These are the first 2 women that he married and murdered. Most of the others he would marry and just desert. He would talk them into marrying him just after meeting them. He was generally accused of having married about 50 different people. I can verify over 20 of them. What got him in trouble eventually is after about 20 marriages that we know of, he came back to Chicago, reprised the name Johann Hock that he used to live, look, there's 2 of me, and took out this ad in the newspaper, in a German paper, saying, hey, I'm a well-to-do German about age of 40. I'm looking for a wife. Let me know. The ad was answered by Maria Walker. Maria Walker was running a candy store in what is now the Lincoln Park neighborhood. She talked to him for half an hour, then they agreed to marry. Shortly thereafter, she died of arsenic poisoning, and while the body was still on the bed, Hock proposed to her sister, Amelia. There were jokes about her not being exactly good-looking even at the time. So, after he ditched her and took all of her money, Marie's body was exhumed and found to be full of arsenic. Hock was eventually captured in New York with a fountain pen full of arsenic that he tried to say was headache powder. And the stories got wilder and wilder. This is a drawing of Hock allegedly hypnotizing his landlady. Now, his landlady, Catherine Kumerl, in New York, was where he fled after killing Marie and deserting Amelia. He went to a boarding house in New York. Catherine Kumerl, the landlady, was a big talker and said she was disgusted every time a man tried to make love to her. But Hock, she said, would grab her wrists and look into her eyes, and then she was just in his power. But she saw his picture in the newspaper, realized that this was that awful man in Chicago, and Hock very soon was arrested, brought back to Chicago, and after a long saga, hanged right around here. It's a very, very short version of his story. I've got entire tours of Holmes and Hawk. Really ought to do one about Minnie, too. I think she's going to be the subject of one of the early episodes of the podcast that is coming up soon. Now, at the same time that Hawk was operating in Chicago, there was another, buried over here at Forest Home Cemetery. We've been here a couple times lately. Right about here is the unmarked grave. Underwater when I went to look for it the first few times. Of Belle Gunness, who wished to be buried here at Forest Home, according to her will. But this is a younger version of Belle Gunness. Here's an older one. She started out operating in Chicago, where her husbands tended to die, and she tended to collect insurance money. After a candy store that she operated with one of them burned down, and she collected insurance money and apparently thought, hey, cool way to make money. So, using the money she got from various payouts, she bought a farm in Indiana and started taking out advertisements just like the ones that Hawk was doing. At one point, she met a guy through an ad and started writing, "You've got to come move to my farm. You'll love it here. Come prepared to stay forever." Forever. But then one night there was a big fire at the farm, and Belle was killed, or at least allegedly killed. There are those who say it wasn't really her at all. But when they started digging through the rubble of the fire, they found lots and lots of bodies, probably dozens of bodies, and dozens of people who had been lured down to this place, murdered and buried in the hog pit, or fed to the hogs. And people just seemed like they were having a blast hopping around through here, helping themselves to relics. We can see here a little bit of her various buildings that she had over on Elizabeth Street here in Chicago. Now, at the time, they couldn't really find any identifying traits. Apparently, she had gotten into a bed to burn the place down, and no one now knows really what happened that night. Did she burn the place down? Was it all an accident? Was it Ray, the caretaker of the place, who had gotten into an argument with her? No one really knows. There's not even a coherent theory as to what explained it. And also, they couldn't find any identifying marks for several days, so a lot of people thought it wasn't really Belle's body at all that they found charred beyond recognition. So newspapers started doctoring up the photos to show how she might look in disguise. And still, many people think that she might have just escaped the whole thing. So, even at the time, people wondered, what if Johann Hawk and Belle Gunness had answered each other's personal ads? There's a whole arsenic and old lace sort of story there. In fact, they also were said to have a victim in common. Justina Leffler was dismissed as a possible Hawk victim. But then they came up with the idea that, okay, well, maybe Hawk married her, then sent her to Belle to be killed. This was the theory of a guy named Clifton Wooldridge, who wrote books about how he was the greatest detective in the world. People still fall for his stories. Even though the books were ghost-written, he was kicked out of the force at a time when it was really hard to do that. But Belle has recently been written about in Harold Schechter's book, Hell's Princess. And honestly, people have told me I should do a Belle book, but I don't think I can do a better one than Harold has done here. I've emailed back and forth with them just a little bit, but we're kind of at a dead end on that case. So here we are in Bohemian National Cemetery. Bohemian National Cemetery has the graves of the Vrozel family, who started dying one after another back in the early 20th century, a couple of years after the Johann Hawk case. I don't know what went wrong with my camera here, but this was their house, or approximately where their house was, on West 19th Street. Oh, that was a Google Street Views. This was back pandemic time that I put this all together. But they had a fortune teller they were employing named Herman Billick. And when the family started dying off one after another, naturally, a lot of people assumed that it must be Herman Billick carrying them off. First Mary died, then Martin and Rosa died, then various other people died. Did they swallow Billick's poison powers? That was definitely the theory of George M. Shippey, who had been the chief of police for a couple of years by then, though he was very close to the tail end of his career. Eventually, he would shoot a guy to death because he looked Jewish. Got off the hook thanks to a coroner who was even more corrupt than he was. But over the course of this, one of the things that got Herman Billick convicted is little Jerry Vrazel said that I watched him mixing up the poisons, and then I watched people take them and die. Trouble is, it later came out that Coroner Hoffman, later Chief of Police Kaufman, had threatened him into doing that. He said, if you don't say this, even if, I don't care if it's not true, if you don't say that it happened in trial, we'll say that you were the killer. So eventually, Billick was pardoned by Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, later to be famous as the Commissioner of Baseball. And here he is after his pardon in 1917, just shortly before he died. Now, really, the evidence against him is very, very slim. Coroner Hoffman cooked up as much as he could, ignored a lot of evidence that would have exonerated him. Here he is in a hat. But this was all recently covered very well in a book by Steve Shookus called Poisoned. Highly recommend that one. He really did a good job digging into it and finding all of the data that makes it very obvious that Coroner Hoffman and Inspector Shippey just cooked this one up, as they probably did several times. A more likely candidate for the killer is Emma Vrazel, a daughter of the family. So, the killings died after most of her family was dead. But most likely, Emma was the one who had the means and had the motive. So Emma is quite possibly our serial killer in this case. We're going a little bit over time, but I don't want to skip out on Louise Lindloff, who lived over here in the medical district. We're just kind of walking over towards where her house was. Would have been right about here where the Starbucks is nowadays. Don't know if they know that over at the Starbucks. But Louise operated right around here. So here she is. She was operating around the 1910s as a fortune teller. You see a pattern here. But she was a fortune teller and crystal ball reader whose family all started dying off. And she would tell people exactly when they were going to die. So this might have been, people later realized that this timing was timed right about when the insurance money from the last family member would die. This is her with her lawyer, George Remus, who is considered one of the models for the Great Gatsby, and whose daughter Dorothy, or daughter Romola Remus, was the first Dorothy in Wizard of Oz movies. Here is Louise. Louise was a crystal ball reader. She had a crystal ball that she paid an insane amount of money for and was said to contain in the center of it a tear from the eye duct of Cleopatra. It's very difficult for me going through all of her sources and all of her trial, trying to figure out if she really thought that she was psychic or if it was all just a ruse the entire time. She never dropped the act. She really does act entirely as though she was actually predicting all of these deaths and the crystal ball was actually worth spending the money on. At one point, they said that it wasn't really arsenic in their bodies. It was just arsenic from the wallpaper. Just about everybody accused of arsenic poisoning said that it was the wallpaper at the time. People had found out that arsenic in wallpaper was bad for your health. There's a book about this, too. It is called Bitten by Witch Fever by Lucinda Dickens Hawksley, third great-granddaughter of Charles Dickens. I got to take her on a ghost tour a few years ago. It was a real thrill for me. But, you know, we have gone over time at this point. Well, let's do Tilly Klimek anyway. So over here on Winchester in what is now the Wicker Park, Bucktown area, is this house still standing. Last time I was there was a Wi-Fi coming out of here called Old Lady Tilly Klimek's Haunted House. She lived, I believe, on the first floor. And quite a bit of her neighborhood is still attached, still standing. Such as the Polonia Dairy is still there. But this was a woman by the name of Tilly Klimek, or several other different last names. Now, she lived in this little Poland neighborhood at a time when it was very common for people to just be very insulated in that community. She spoke English only haltingly and only with a very thick accent, even though she had been in the United States really since she was a baby. But one of her husbands here, Mr. Klimek, or this is even a different husband, Frank Kupchak, they started noticing one of her husbands died, and people got suspicious and found that he had had an awful lot of arsenic inside of him. So at the time of that, she was living with Joe Klimek, for the time of her last husband, over on Thomas Street, which is also still standing. There's Joseph. He looked about like this. Now, by all accounts, these guys were not good guys. They were, when the judge said he wasn't much of a husband, even as husbands go nowadays. But eventually, she and her cousin Nellie were both arrested for poisoning people. And Nellie's house is still up, too. It is at 1419 Cortez, just nearby. Now, it was noted at this time, in the early 1920s, it was widely reported over and over again that women accused of murder in Chicago always seemed to be acquitted. Over and over again, no matter how much of a dead sure case they had gotten on them. And even if they did, like with Louise Lindelof, she had probably killed several people and just got a jail term. They never got the gallows, and a lot of what we would now call feminist writers at the time, people like Genevieve Forbes Herrick, thought that was just a disgrace that they were being treated so nicely. So, but with Nellie, when they found out that a couple of Tilly's husbands had lots and lots of arsenic in their body, they started exhuming all of her family members. You know, I remember the very long Find a Grave Friday where we went to found this grave, which at the time looked like this. This is one of Tilly's cousins who was exhumed during the whole thing. The cross that was on top of the grave is sitting next to it now. Could use a bit of a cleanup. This is such a remarkable picture of them digging up this grave. Finding it was no easy trick over at St. Adalbert's Cemetery. Tilly herself is unmarked in this place somewhere. So she was eventually convicted and sentenced to jail. She died in jail and was buried here in a term grave at St. Adalbert's. It's been redeveloped and built over now. We can't even find very well approximately where it is. Now, her Find a Grave says that she's at Bohemian National. The thing is, St. Adalbert's was called Old Bohemian at the time. And I tried to fix it, but they insisted to me that there was no such place as St. Adalbert's. I'm literally standing in there right now. But what do I know? This was a very long Find a Grave Friday. But all right, everybody, now it's time to plug a few things. For one thing, coming up, we will be listing some boat tours tomorrow for the time of Mystericon, September 27th and 28th, but already the weekend leading up to the DNC here in Chicago, we will be doing a couple of tours called the Political Graveyard. These are two tours, one at Graceland and one at Oak Woods on Saturday, August 17th, then another at Rose Hill the next day. These will talk mostly about politicians, but I'm not going to skip over a really good story when we're passing just because the guy never got involved in politics. All coming up very soon right here. Those ones are already listed now. The boat is coming right up. So next week, I may not be able to do a tour. I will be out with a school group and flying back from St. Louis. So we'll put those up in a second. But I'll see if I can figure something out for them. But in the meantime, for one thing, there are two new designs. At cafepress.com/shop/MysteriousChicago. I will paste that in over here once again in the chat. This is the generic Mysterious Chicago wraparound design that is available so far exclusively on Drinkware. I wanted to make this into a stadium cup so badly. That didn't quite seem to be plausible. You got to make like hundreds and hundreds to get it right. Hey, Heather, you and I always seem to be traveling to the same city at the same time. I'm going to be in St. Louis long enough to have a sandwich, and that's literally it. I'm taking a school group in, having lunch with them, then flying out while they drive the rest of the way back. But that, and then of course, also, Mystericon 24. The new artwork is all set. We are going to be in the Joseph Urban Room in the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago, which is also where Benny Goodman is playing right here. So once again, lots of really great stuff coming up. I'm very proud of this artwork. The white lines around the buildings took, what do I want to say? So, all right, everybody. So thanks a lot for joining me. We'll move this down, just hang out like we always do. So thanks a lot. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago. Stay safe, stay strong. Let's just hang. I will finish my smoked peanut butter old-fashioned. Heather, you're going to a funeral. I'm going to Firehouse Subs. Like that's my whole day with that group. I'm going to ride to St. Louis, then fly home. Kathleen, Joseph Urban was an architect. He designed a lot of theaters and a lot of hotels and resorts, including Mar-a-Lago. Let us all spread the word about Mysteriocon. When I got a 4-day trip with this school group, it's all going to be 4 rather easy days. So I'm just giving most of the money to the Harris campaign. No, I'm just gonna kind of figure that one a fundraiser gig. Though some of it is also going to concert tickets in the UK. Not gonna lie. Yeah, Casey, it's kind of weird. It's like a whole work day for me, and it's, you know, a well-paid work day, but that's their whole schedule really is just driving back home to Louisiana. But I will ride with them as far as St. Louis, get them through lunch, and get back. $1 million in the Zoom meeting tonight, alright. I can't match that. I saw there were like 130,000 people online for it on Zoom. Breaking all records. I don't really plan this before it was the Harris campaign, but that much more so. So I avoid getting too political on these things, but you all know my politics here by now. Gary, I have done the London Tower before. It's been a long time. But I know I'll be right near Dickens' house, so I definitely want to see that. And I just realized one of the days I'm in Wolverhampton. That's only like an hour and a half from Stratford-on-Avon. So I might just hop on the train and go to Stratford for a day. See such sights as there are there. Thanks, Benjamin, for the donation. You know, Audrey occasionally we get a right-winger in here. Just occasionally. But I don't really feel like making this a welcoming environment for those people, so, Yeah, it'll be, I'm actually flying out election day. I will have voted by then. Flying out election night. But at the time, I thought it was going to be another of those cases where it's going to be a long time before, where it's going to be a couple of days before we even know. Now, I'm not kind of thinking that anymore. The St. Paul sandwich? Jordana, no, I do not. Is that in St. Paul or St. Louis? Does Governor Wars eat them? Aw, Chris, that's incredible. Julia says Abn. Eli used to call me Auden. I am an Auden. Emily, duly noted. Best lemon cake this side of the Atlantic. Egg Foo Young Hoagie. I don't think they have those at the place we're going in St. Louis. I wouldn't mind staying longer in St. Louis. I love City Museum. But no, all we're doing is a lunch stop. Hey, Tony in Woodstock. We're at the post-show hang now. Egg Foo Young Hoagie. That does sound interesting. I have been sipping away tonight on a smoked peanut butter old-fashioned, but hey, I'm finished now. Or I'm out of bourbon. Or out of rye. Maybe I should just leave it at that. Nah. A little Jim Beam ride. I knew I was going to be using it in cocktails, not as a sipper. But let me post that link again for the new merch. There's the cat on the couch. So there's two cats on the couch. There's Miles and Priya are both on there. Priya is lying down. You can see her by the pillow. Miles is up on the backrest. It's kind of his favorite perch. I did see that the Wainwright building is for sale. Now, Miles really matches the color of the couch just about perfectly. Yeah, we'll move over to him, though. Let's take the microphone. Hey, guys. And Miles in his favorite perch. Is this your favorite perch, Miles? That's your favorite perch. Priya doesn't know that she's on TV. She might like this a little better. She's very skittish. Until she gets to know you. That takes a couple days.
Benny Goodman presents On the Alley.
I hit the mute. Did I hit the mute button? Okay, there we go. Priya, these people have all known you since you were a little kitten, most of them. You were just a tiny little kitten. I'll even take off the links. Most of you know how to pay up. I try not to get pushy about donations or anything. It feels unseemly. This is mainly a promo for tour tickets. Once again, speaking of those, we do have the Political Graveyard tours for August are going. Might run an Underground Railroad one during the convention. It'll just be like donations only. The campaign. Miles got jealous and left. I went to go use the actual scratchers for once instead of the couch. And Priya is still so skittish. If I start coughing or something, she'll bolt. But she wants to cuddle so much. Yeah, very rare to get this much time with the Priya cat. More than you usually get with Lily. Who's also very cuddly. She never really comes in here when I'm broadcasting. Living room's not usually her space. She prefers just wherever Ronnie is.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and we stay right in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago and dance some more to Benny Goodman and his orchestra and hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Coming in even closer, Priya? Say hi to everybody. Curling up right on the keyboard. Of course, you're looking away. There you go. Look up. Look up. See the people. There we go. You're keeping your claws in, too. Good girl. If it hollers, let it go, let it fly away. She's gradually getting better about keeping her claws in when she climbs on me. She wants to cuddle so much. Bat, that's awesome. Always be yourself, Bob. Miles, if you just heard a meow right there, that was Miles. They're about to go out and play a little bit of horse stampede, I think. They're walking down the hall right now. Kind of glaring at one another. Well, I don't really have a lot of great spooky cemetery tales. I'm in them all the time, but not a lot of spooky things really happen in them. We're in the post-show hangout now, for those of you just joining us. We did the whole talk about antique serial killers. We covered quite a bit of cemetery stuff, a lot of the burial places of victims. But no, I haven't really come into anything spooky there. It was the occasional strange noise. And the other day I was in the car telling somebody about Harriet Wolff, who is sometimes thought to be haunting the Nederlander Theater, it's the former Iroquois Theater, and is also part of the Graceland Tour sometimes. We heard something smack the side of my car. There's nothing nearby. Belle, we cover Resurrection Mary quite a bit around here. My Ghosts of Chicago book detailed every known sighting. At least up through the early 80s. After that, the story was just so well known, when people say they hadn't heard it, I just don't believe them. Also, there's a lot of people who get their kicks out of dressing up in a white dress and wandering down Archer Avenue. Tracy, I'm very sorry to hear that. On my desk, that's just a handkerchief. The dark Brandon handkerchief. I've got the Teddy Roosevelt one from 1912 up on the wall. Hey, Cassidy. Yeah, Bill, I did a whole Ghost of Chicago book. I don't do as many ghost things nowadays as I used to. Partly because that scene is just such a mess. I've definitely never come across anything in my apartment here. I know somebody died here. And they got a whole juvenile delinquent outside of the place sleeping in 1950. He looked pictures at him right out of Central Casting, and he's probably like 98 and sleepier than ever now. Thanks, Karen. We might do the Ghost Bus Tour again this year. For Friday night. Those are not coming to the mixer. You know, I mean, this is, it's, you know, I hate to get it financial about this kind of stuff, but I gotta think fiscally occasionally. The name of the first book I mentioned that I thought about rewriting? Let's zip back. Well, there is the Ghosts of Chicago book that is in a new edition now that has been kind of rewritten. But, see, The Mysterious Chicago, the book, is probably due for an upgrade. Murder Maps USA, that was kind of a... Let's see that I've thought about rewriting in there. There's a new... I got a new Johann Hawk one coming. And one about Trinity and St. Paul's graveyards in New York, which should be out in January. It was green. I think the only one green on here would be Murder Maps. And that one was just a contract gig. I just filled in the text, really. Keaton wants the Smart Alex Guide to American History updated. I would like to do that too, but Random House has not really been keen on that. No, not that one. That one. H.H. Holmes, the Graceland book. Those I think are the only ones that I put up here that are mine. Yeah, Luna was also the oddities market, but it was, I don't know, I just had this weird feeling that every toxic person I've ever tried to avoid is probably going to be there.
On Michigan Avenue in Chicago. This is the National Broadcasting Company.
All right, Benny Goodman is just wrapping up right there, so I will also, but here, once again, new merch on the cups, cafepress.com/shop/mysterious-chicago. Oh, the one I emailed the author would have been either Harold Schechter or for the Belle Gunness book, Hell's Princess, or Dean Job, who did the Thomas Neal Cream book. Now, which grave is by the Eternity of Death statue? In any case, well, once again, this is the green one was probably the Thomas Neal Cream one, Dr. Cream, by Dean Job. In any case, that one, that is available exclusively on Drinkware so far, but there's also shirts, etc. for Mystericon 24. Coming up in September, just a couple of months off. So thanks a lot, everybody. Some of you will be out of the White Oak Library in like Romeoville tomorrow. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. The music is wrapped up, so it's time for me to wrap up. So thanks a lot. I'm Adam for Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling everyone, stay safe, stay strong. Yes, I want to hear from Belle, like, which grave do you walk back? It's called Eternal Silence, is the one. It's supposed to be Father Time, but our visions of the Grim Reaper are based on Father Time images anyway, so same thing. Yeah, that is at Graceland. I got a whole book on that. Chuck, I gotta double check on that. Because I think Crest Hill sounds more likely. But where the hell is that? I'll have to find out. Hopefully enough time that I can drive through a place and grab some food. We got hundreds and hundreds of suburbs in this city. I haven't even heard of some of them. Far south, okay. Jolietish, yeah, same thing. But yeah, Belle, who on YouTube? Whose grave did you walk past? I'd be remiss not to point out Graceland Cemetery, Chicago Stories, Symbol, and Secrets. The guy who commissioned that one specifically said he wanted the most substantial and imposing monument that the funds put aside will allow. And that's what he got. But alright, everybody, so a couple of tours are already up. We're going to have the boat tours listed tomorrow. Mystericon stuff coming tomorrow. Lots and lots of great stuff. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling you all to stay safe, stay strong, and of course, if you can, stay spooky, everybody.